Hey there, welcome to Cozzii Traveler. Tonight, we're not going to the top of New York City. We're going underneath it. Beneath the chandeliers of the Waldorf Astoria Hotel, beneath the marble floors where movie stars once danced and presidents once toasted, lies something that shouldn't exist. A secret railway platform, hidden in plain sight, used only by a handful of the most powerful people in the world, and completely invisible to everyone else. Most guests who check into the Waldorf have no idea that active Metro North tracks and service tunnels run beneath the area, and that a disused private platform hides among them. They don't know about the tunnel that runs beneath the hotel, or that it once allowed the President of the United States to arrive and depart without a single soul ever seeing him. It's a story about secrecy, power, and the strange kind of privacy that only the elite can buy. And it's been sitting there, locked behind steel doors for nearly a century. So dim the lights, pull your blanket a little closer, get yourself comfortable, and before we head underground, take a second to subscribe and say hello to your fellow travellers tonight in the comments. Let us know where you're tuning in from and what time it is. It's always wild to see how far these stories travel. Now, it's time to go to New York. New York in the early 1930s was a city of contradictions. The skyline was climbing higher every year. The Empire State Building had just opened in 1931, standing 1,250 feet tall, the tallest building in the world. The Chrysler Building was still gleaming like a silver spear in the sun, and the streets below were packed with Model A Fords and restless ambition. The city was loud, impossibly loud. Construction crews hammered away at new skyscrapers. Street vendors called out their wares, the elevated trains screeched around corners, showering sparks onto the sidewalks below. But below the noise, below the glamour, a second city existed, one that few people ever saw. A web of tunnels, train lines, and forgotten chambers buried beneath Manhattan. Grand Central Terminal, in particular, was more than just a train station. It was a living machine. A vertical labyrinth of tracks, switches, and staircases built to move hundreds of thousands of people every single day. The terminal's story begins decades earlier. In 1871, railroad magnate Cornelius Vanderbilt, known as the Commodore, created Grand Central Depot to unite three separate railroads: the New York Central and Hudson River Railroad, the New York and Harlem Railroad, and the New York, New Haven, and Hartford Railroad. But by the turn of the century, the old depot had become dangerously overcrowded. Steam locomotives belched thick black smoke into the covered train shed, creating hazardous conditions. Then, on January 15th, 1902, disaster struck. In the smoke-filled Park Avenue tunnel approaching Grand Central, a train engineer failed to see a stop signal. His train ploughed into the back of another, killing 15 people and injuring dozens more. The tragedy forced a reckoning. New York City officials banned steam locomotives from operating south of the Harlem River. If the railroads wanted to continue serving Manhattan, they would have to electrify. William J. Wilgus, the chief engineer of the New York Central Railroad, saw opportunity in crisis. Instead of simply converting to electric trains, he proposed something revolutionary: tear down the old depot entirely and build a magnificent new terminal, one that would be buried underground, with electric trains operating on 2 levels beneath the streets. Engineered by Wilgus, the project moved millions of cubic yards of rock and soil, dropped the train yard to approximately 50 feet below the streets, then sold 48 acres of air rights above the underground tracks to finance Midtown's boom. The excavation alone was staggering. Workers blasted down to an average depth of 50 feet, removing 1.6 million cubic yards of rock and 1.2 million cubic yards of dirt. Before excavation could even begin, 25 miles of pipes and sewers had to be relocated. Construction lasted 10 years and cost $80 million, equivalent to over $1 billion today. More than 400 hopper cars filled with excavated material were transported daily, some travelling as far as 40 miles away to widen the railroad's right-of-way along the Hudson River. When Grand Central Terminal opened on February 2nd, 1913, at 12:01 a.m., it was the largest train station in the world by number of platforms. 44 platforms serving 67 tracks, arranged on 2 levels. Over 150,000 people visited on opening day. The main concourse spans about 275 by 120 feet, with a 125-foot-high vaulted ceiling painted with constellations by French artist Paul César Helou. The celestial mural shows a medievalized Mediterranean sky in reverse, often described as God's eye view. But that was just what people could see. The real genius of Grand Central was what lay beneath. Wilges's design freed up 48 acres of air rights above the underground tracks. This prime Manhattan real estate was sold for development, helping finance the terminal's construction. Within a decade, the blocks surrounding Grand Central were each valued at $2 to $3 million. The designers planned for expansion, for Secret Service routes, for mechanical access tunnels that twisted deep below the streets. They built power substations, ventilation shafts, and entire levels that most commuters never knew existed. One of these hidden spaces was a 12-track storage yard called the Lex Yard, built with Grand Central's two-level plan. And it was there, at Track 61, that one of the most secretive stories in New York history began. Track 61 sits in the Lex Yard, a storage yard built with Grand Central's two-level plan. Its platform by Tracks 61 and 63 began as an ash removal point for the terminal's power plant and later offered discreet access near the Waldorf. Track 61 wasn't listed on any public map. It didn't appear in guidebooks or tourist brochures. For most of the 20th century it was a ghost, a rumour whispered by railway workers who had glimpsed it in passing but were told never to speak of it. And for good reason. Because Track 61 wasn't built for the public. It was built for power. To understand Track 61, you first need to understand the Waldorf Astoria. The original Waldorf Astoria sat at the corner of 5th Avenue and 34th Street. Two hotels built by feuding cousins, William Waldorf Astor and John Jacob Astor IV, who competed to see who could build the grander establishment. William built the Waldorf in 1893. John Jacob responded by building the Astoria right next door in 1897. Eventually, they connected the buildings with a corridor, allegedly with the condition that it could be sealed with brick if the cousins' feud ever reignited. The hyphenated Waldorf Astoria became the most famous hotel in America, hosting presidents, royalty, and captains of industry. But by the 1920s, the neighborhood had changed. Fifth Avenue was becoming a commercial corridor, and the land beneath the hotel had become too valuable to support just a hotel. In 1929, the original Waldorf Astoria was demolished. In its place rose the Empire State Building, completed in just 14 months and standing as a monument to American ambition. Meanwhile, on Park Avenue between 49th and 50th Streets, construction began on a new Waldorf Astoria, one that would dwarf its predecessor in every way. The location was strategic. Park Avenue had been transformed by Grand Central's construction. What had once been an open railway cut, smoky, dirty, and lined with tenements, was now covered over and lined with elegant apartment buildings and hotels. When the Waldorf Astoria reopened at its current location in 1931, it wasn't just another hotel. It was a monument to luxury, 47 stories of Art Deco opulence, designed by architects Schulze and Weaver. At the time of its opening, it was both the largest and tallest hotel in the world, a title it held until 1957. The hotel had 2,200 rooms. It had its own barbershop, its own doctors, its own post office. It had a grand ballroom that seats about 1,450 for banquets. It had a rooftop garden where guests could stroll among palm trees, high above the noise of the city. The hotel's opulence attracted world leaders, Hollywood stars, and business titans. In 1956, it hosted the engagement party of Grace Kelly and Prince Rainier III of Monaco. Marilyn Monroe lived there temporarily. Frank Sinatra kept a suite. Every US president from Herbert Hoover through Barack Obama stayed in the hotel's presidential suite when visiting New York. And deep in its blueprints, hidden among the specifications for elevators and mechanical rooms, was a feature that almost no one knew about: a private railroad siding. The New York Times reported in 1929 that the new Waldorf would have a private railway siding underneath the building, where guests with private rail cars may have them routed directly to the hotel, instead of to the Pennsylvania Station or the Grand Central Terminal. It was called Track 61, and while it looked like just another maintenance spur in the bowels of Grand Central, it had one crucial difference. It connected to a freight elevator by 49th Street that allowed discreet access to the Waldorf. The platform was originally built to serve a different purpose. During Grand Central's construction in the 1910s, the Lex Yard's platforms, including those at tracks 61 and 63, were used to carry ashes away from the terminal's power station and heating plant. But when the Waldorf purchased the air rights above these tracks in 1929, the hotel also acquired the track below. The power plant was demolished in 1930 to make way for the hotel, and the platform's location made it ideal for unobtrusive access to the new building. The elevator was an auto-capable freight lift. A limousine could roll off the train onto the elevator, which allowed the vehicle to be lifted discreetly to controlled service areas in the hotel's lower levels, out of public view. The platform wasn't on public maps, and the elevator access was strictly controlled. It's never been a public station. No one saw who arrived, no one saw who left. And that was exactly the point. The Waldorf's management never advertised this feature. It wasn't mentioned in promotional materials or press releases. Even most of the hotel staff didn't know it was there. But for those who did, for presidents, for dignitaries, for anyone who needed to move through New York without being seen, it was priceless. The man who would become most closely associated with this strange underground link was Franklin Delano Roosevelt. By the mid-1930s, Roosevelt was already president and already living with the effects of polio. He'd contracted the disease in 1921 at the age of 39, while vacationing with his family at their beloved Campobello Island retreat in New Brunswick, Canada. It was August, and Roosevelt had been swimming in the cold waters of the Bay of Fundy. Within days, he developed a fever. Then came the paralysis. The diagnosis was devastating. Polio had ravaged his body, leaving his legs mostly paralyzed. He would never walk unassisted again. At the time, there was no cure for polio. It was a feared disease that struck without warning, often leaving its victims, especially children, permanently disabled or dead. For a 39-year-old politician with presidential ambitions, the diagnosis seemed like a death sentence to his career. Roosevelt withdrew from public life for a time to rehabilitate at his home in Hyde Park, New York. He spent years searching for treatments that might restore function to his legs. He worked with physiotherapists. He exercised relentlessly, developing his upper body until he became, in the words of one observer, a bulked-up guy above the waist. In 1926, he traveled to Warm Springs, Georgia, where he found relief in the naturally heated mineral pools. When the resort struggled financially, Roosevelt bought it for $200,000 and turned it into a rehabilitation facility for himself and other polio survivors. For the rest of his life, Roosevelt wore heavy steel leg braces that locked his legs into position and allowed him to stand upright. He used a wheelchair most of the time, though not a standard institutional wheelchair. Roosevelt designed his own wheelchair, converting a dining chair by replacing its legs with bicycle-like wheels. It was small, discreet, and could navigate tight corners and narrow hallways with ease. But Roosevelt understood something crucial about American culture in the 1920s and 30s. Disability carried a cruel stigma. During this era, many Americans believed that physical weakness was a sign of moral or mental weakness. Disabled family members were often institutionalized or hidden away. The disabled were not considered employable and were frequently removed from society entirely. The idea of a president who couldn't walk seemed incompatible with the strength and vigor the office demanded. Roosevelt understood this, and so, with the help of the Secret Service and a largely cooperative press, he created an elaborate performance of able-bodiedness. When he re-entered public life, he made his first major appearance at the 1924 Democratic National Convention, where he nominated New York Governor Al Smith for president. Roosevelt appeared on crutches, slowly making his way across the stage. The audience gave him a standing ovation, not for his speech, but for his courage in appearing at all. Over time, Roosevelt developed techniques to manage public perception. He learned to walk short distances by shifting his weight from side to side, using a cane and the support of someone's arm, usually his son James or a trusted aide. His legs remained locked in their braces. It was exhausting and painful, but it created the impression of mobility. Photographers were given clear instructions: never photograph Roosevelt in his wheelchair, being carried, or in any way that emphasized his disability. If they violated this unwritten gentleman's agreement, the Secret Service would confiscate the film. This cooperation was remarkably successful, though not absolute. The press did occasionally mention or even photograph Roosevelt's wheelchair. Time magazine in 1934 noted that bodyguard Gus Generick helped the president into his wheelchair, and Life magazine published at least one photograph of him in his wheelchair. But these instances were rare. The broader narrative emphasized Roosevelt's vitality and energy rather than his limitations. Most importantly, the visual record, the photographs and newsreels that shaped public perception, showed Roosevelt standing, waving, smiling, always in motion, never helpless. At public events, Roosevelt was always photographed standing, often leaning on a podium or gripping its edges with white-knuckled intensity to keep himself upright. He delivered fireside chats from a wheelchair, but the radio microphone never showed it. He waved from the back of open cars, his legs locked in steel braces beneath his suit. Before he moved into the governor's mansion in Albany in 1929, the building was made wheelchair accessible with ramps and an elevator. When he became president in 1933, the White House received similar modifications. Most Americans never realized how limited his movement really was. Journalist John Gunther reported that in the 1930s, he often met people in Europe, including world leaders, who were unaware of Roosevelt's paralysis. So, when Roosevelt visited New York, especially his favorite hotel, the Waldorf Astoria, discretion wasn't just a preference, it was a necessity. Track 61 offered him exactly that. Here's how the system worked when a president needed to use Track 61. A custom-built train car would arrive at Grand Central Terminal as part of a larger presidential train. This wasn't an ordinary passenger car, it was a fortress on rails. The most famous of these presidential cars was nicknamed Ferdinand Magellan. Built originally in 1928 as a luxury Pullman car for wealthy private passengers, it was acquired by the US government after the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941. Suddenly, presidential security became paramount, and traveling by train, which Roosevelt loved, posed serious risks. Enemy agents, saboteurs, assassins. The Secret Service needed something that could protect the president while he traveled, so the government retrofitted the Magellan into a rolling fortress. Engineers added 5/8-inch armor plating to the walls. They installed 3-inch thick bulletproof glass in the windows. They reinforced the undercarriage and added escape hatches. They installed communications equipment that could keep the president connected to Washington even while moving. By the time the work was done, the car weighed 285,000 pounds, almost 3 times the weight of a standard Pullman car. It was so heavy that it required special clearances on certain rail lines and could only take curves and grades at reduced speeds. Inside, it was surprisingly luxurious. The car had a master bedroom, a dining room, a small kitchen, and an observation lounge. Roosevelt could work, eat, and sleep while traveling between cities, all while remaining invisible to the public. Interestingly, the Magellan's most frequent user wasn't Roosevelt. It was Harry S. Truman, who used it extensively during his presidency for his famous whistle-stop campaign tours across America. When the presidential train arrived at Grand Central, it would quietly route the relevant cars down the tunnel system to Track 61, deep beneath the Waldorf Astoria. Here, the choreography became crucial. Roosevelt traveled with his Pierce Arrow limousine, a powerful car custom-fitted with hand controls so Roosevelt could drive it himself despite his paralysis. The limousine was transported in a separate auto or baggage car attached to the presidential train, not inside the armoured Magellan itself. When the train reached Track 61, the limousine would be driven off its rail car onto the small platform. From there, it would be positioned on the freight elevator. Slowly, with a groan of machinery, the elevator would rise through the darkness, lifting the vehicle discreetly to controlled service areas and the hotel's lower levels out of public view. Roosevelt could then be wheeled through service corridors, into private elevators, and up to his suite, all without a single stranger seeing him in his wheelchair. The entire process was designed for one thing: invisibility. No crowds, no photographers, no possibility of someone catching an unflattering image of the president being helped from his wheelchair. Now, here's where the historical record becomes contested. There is firm documentation of Franklin Roosevelt using the Waldorf connection on October 21, 1944, when Roosevelt made a campaign stop in New York City during his run for a fourth term. Beyond that single, well-sourced instance, additional trips remain plausible but unproven in public records. A Secret Service memorandum from that visit states, at 10:05 p.m., the president will leave the hotel over the same route he entered, i.e. via East Side Lexington Avenue elevator, and will then proceed via New York Central elevators to the New York Central Railroad siding, located in the basement of the hotel. That's the only concrete proof we have of FDR using the route. Does that mean he only used it once? Possibly. Does it mean he used it many times but only one visit was documented? Also possible. What we do know is that the infrastructure existed, it was functional, and it was designed specifically to serve the needs of high-profile guests who required absolute privacy. But here's the thing, even if Roosevelt only used Track 61 once, the mere existence of this hidden route changed everything about how powerful people could move through New York. Track 61 became a symbol, not just of presidential security, but of the invisible infrastructure that shields the powerful from the rest of us. Now, here's where the story gets murky, and where myth and fact blur together in fascinating ways. For decades, people claimed that Roosevelt's personal Pierce Arrow limousine was still down there on Track 61, sitting in the shadows covered in dust, a ghostly relic of presidential power. Urban explorers and railway enthusiasts swapped stories about glimpsing the car through locked gates. Some said it had been sitting there since the 1940s, untouched and forgotten. Others claimed it was Roosevelt's actual car, the one he drove with hand controls. The story became part of New York City lore. Tour guides repeated it, historians referenced it, documentaries featured it. The forgotten presidential limousine, trapped beneath the city, became a romantic metaphor for hidden history. But the truth is more complicated and more interesting. In the early 2000s, researchers and preservationists finally got extensive access to Track 61 to investigate the legend. Metropolitan Transit Authority spokesman Danny Brucker, who served as an unofficial tour guide for the track, had been among those promoting the FDR connection. What they eventually discovered was that a railroad car did sit on Track 63, the adjacent track next to Track 61, for 20 to 30 years. It was visible from Track 61, and its proximity to the presidential siding led many to conclude it must be FDR's car. But when the car was moved to the Danbury Railway Museum in Connecticut in May 2019 for restoration, the truth emerged. The car long seen near the siding was New York Central Baggage Car 002, a standard baggage car with no presidential connection whatsoever. No presidential armor plating involved. Its extra-wide doors that supposedly accommodated FDR's limousine, standard size for baggage cars of that period. The bulletproof armor on its exterior, normal construction for durable New York Central boxcars, the shock-absorbing suspension, also standard for the time. Most tellingly, automotive engineers determined that Roosevelt's Pierce Arrow limousine could never have made the tight turn required to enter the baggage car's interior. So the image of Roosevelt's dusty limousine sitting abandoned on the tracks, as haunting and evocative as it is, turns out to be a myth. As for Roosevelt's actual Pierce Arrow, it travelled with him aboard the presidential train in a separate car, and when he arrived at Track 61 it was driven off and up the elevator into the hotel. It was never stored there permanently. But myths often contain truth, and the truth here is that something extraordinary did happen on that platform. Even if the specific details got blurred over time, even if tour guides and historians misidentified artifacts and conflated separate elements of the story, the essence remains intact. A secret route, a hidden president, a city that never knew he was there. The myth endured not because of a dusty car, but because the idea resonated. In the heart of the world's busiest city, power could disappear, vulnerability could be hidden, and history could unfold in the darkness just out of sight. Roosevelt wasn't the only one to use Track 61, though he's the one most people remember. Over the decades, the platform became a quiet backstage entrance for anyone who needed to move through New York without being noticed. Documented special arrivals include General John J. Pershing, commander of American forces in World War I in 1938, President Franklin Roosevelt in 1944, and General Douglas MacArthur in 1951. Among occasional special uses reported in contemporary and retrospective accounts were a 1946 locomotive demonstration by the American Locomotive Company, showcasing new rail technology to VIP guests and investors. In 1948, a fashion show was held on Track 61. Models strutted down the platform in the latest designs, surrounded by railway workers and curious executives. The juxtaposition, haute couture in an industrial train tunnel, captured the imagination of New York's social elite. In 1955, a charity dinner was hosted on the platform, complete with white tablecloths, candlelight, and formal dress. Guests descended into the tunnels beneath Grand Central to dine in one of the city's most unusual venues. In 1961, the New York Times reported that a documentary film about Reverend James Lawson, known as the Red Cap Preacher, was shot on a siding under the Waldorf Astoria Hotel. The film crew brought lights and cameras into the underground space to capture its unique atmosphere. And in 1965, the legendary Andy Warhol reportedly held an underground party on Track 61. The event, part art installation, part social experiment, blended high culture with the industrial grit of the underground. There's limited documentation of the event, which only adds to its mystique. World War II-era General Douglas MacArthur also used the track during a visit in 1951, demonstrating that military leaders continued to value the discretion it offered. The platform wasn't just for presidents and generals, though. It was a space for spectacle, for moments that could happen nowhere else. A place where New York's fascination with both glamour and infrastructure collided. Through it all, Track 61 remained invisible to the public, locked behind steel gates, accessible only to those with the right connections or the right reasons. Even decades later, the Secret Service reportedly considered Track 61 a strategic asset. In 2003, coverage described the platform as a potential emergency egress during United Nations Week, when President Bush, Secretary of State Colin Powell, and National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice were in New York, an assertion reported at the time by the New York Post, though not officially confirmed by the Secret Service. It wasn't just a platform anymore, it was a symbol of invisible power, a reminder that beneath every city there are layers we never see, and corridors we're never meant to walk. While we're underground, there's one more secret worth mentioning, one that's intimately connected to Track 61 and the story of Grand Central itself. Beneath the terminal, just a short distance from the Waldorf secret siding, lies M42, a massive electrical substation that powers the entire terminal and much of the surrounding rail network. M42 sits 13 stories below street level, 100 feet down in the solid bedrock beneath 43rd Street and Lexington Avenue. It's one of the largest and deepest basements in New York City. When Grand Central converted from steam to electric power in the early 1900s, the designers needed a way to convert high-voltage alternating current from New York City's power grid into the direct current required by the electric trains. The solution was M42, a vast room filled with massive rotary converters, machines that look like something from a steampunk novel. M42's deep rotary converters made Grand Central's electrification possible. These converters are enormous. Each weighs thousands of pounds and stands several stories tall. When they're running, they produce a deep, thrumming hum that reverberates through the bedrock. During World War II, M42 became one of the most heavily guarded locations in New York City. The reason? Grand Central was essential to the war effort. Trains carrying troops, equipment, and supplies moved through the terminal constantly. If the power went out, the entire rail network could grind to a halt, potentially crippling military logistics on the East Coast. Wartime sensitivity and armed security are well recorded. The location was kept secret from the public. Armed guards patrolled the tunnels. Access was strictly controlled. The importance of M42 during this crucial period in American history cannot be overstated. The more dramatic shoot-to-kill law that's often repeated can't be fully verified, but what's certain is that authorities took the threat of sabotage seriously. Even today, M42 is still operational, still converting power for Metro North trains, and it's still off-limits to the public. On rare occasions, railway officials or preservationists are granted access, but for most New Yorkers, M42 remains a mystery. Like Track 61, it's a reminder that the city above is only half the story. Beneath the marble and the noise, there's a second city, one built for function, not beauty, a city of steel and electricity and secrets, humming along just out of sight. Roosevelt's association with Track 61, whether he used it once or many times, wasn't just about convenience. It revealed something deeper about power itself, the ability to disappear in a city that never sleeps, to move unseen in a place that records everything, to control not just your image, but your very visibility. Track 61 wasn't only a railway platform, it was a stage for illusion, a reminder that even in a democracy, some figures still needed, or demanded, invisibility. In many ways, it reflects the contradictions of America in the mid-20th century, a country that wanted transparency but idolized secrecy, that celebrated mobility and freedom, yet asked its leader to hide his inability to walk, that prided itself on equality while maintaining invisible hierarchies of access. Roosevelt's decision to conceal his disability was, by today's standards, controversial. Modern disability rights advocates have wrestled with his legacy. Some argue that he had every right to privacy, that his medical condition was irrelevant to his ability to govern, and that the prejudices of his era made concealment a practical necessity. Others believe that the public deserved to know the full truth about their leader's physical condition, that Roosevelt's performance of able-bodiedness reinforced harmful stereotypes about disability and set back the cause of disability rights by decades. Roosevelt himself seemed conflicted. While he hid his wheelchair use from cameras and newsreels, he was remarkably open about having had polio. He spoke about it in interviews. He founded the Georgia Warm Springs Foundation to help other polio survivors. In 1934, he helped establish the birthday ball tradition, which raised funds for polio treatment and research, eventually funding the development of the Salk vaccine, though Roosevelt didn't live to see it. Time magazine in 1938 began a story. Franklin Roosevelt is not only the nation's #1 citizen, but its #1 victim of infantile paralysis. The article went on to discuss his disability in detail, so it wasn't a complete secret. But Roosevelt lived in a different time, a time when the image of strength mattered more than the reality, a time when voters wanted their leaders to be symbols, untouchable, unbreakable, heroic. And so Roosevelt became exactly that. He stood at podiums, gripping the edges with white knuckles to keep himself upright. He delivered fireside chats from a wheelchair, but the radio microphone never showed it. He waved from the back of open cars, his legs locked in steel braces beneath his suit, and he descended beneath the city into the darkness of Track 61 to preserve the illusion. It's both inspiring and heartbreaking that one of the most beloved presidents in American history had to literally descend beneath the city to hide his pain. But it also speaks to the lengths that power will go to protect itself. Roosevelt wasn't just hiding his disability, he was hiding his vulnerability. And in a world where vulnerability is often mistaken for weakness, that secrecy became essential. Track 61, then, is more than just a railway platform. It's a monument to the masks we wear, to the secrets we keep, to the invisible scaffolding that holds up public images. And maybe that's why it still feels so alive, because deep down, it's a story about all of us, about the things we choose to hide, and the tunnels we build to protect them. Today, the Waldorf Astoria stands transformed. In 2014, the hotel was sold to Anbang Insurance Group, a Chinese company, for $1.95 billion, one of the most expensive hotel sales in history. The sale raised immediate security concerns. The Waldorf Astoria had been the preferred residence for American presidents visiting New York since the hotel's opening. Every president from Herbert Hoover through Barack Obama had stayed in the hotel's presidential suite. But with the hotel now under foreign ownership, those concerns became urgent. The worry wasn't about the hotel staff or management. It was about the potential for surveillance equipment to be installed during renovations, or for sensitive communications to be monitored. In 2015, the United States government quietly announced that the president would no longer stay at the Waldorf during visits to New York. The delegation moved to other hotels in the city. The Secret Service cited security risks, but didn't elaborate. It was a symbolic blow to the hotel's prestige, an acknowledgement that the era of the Waldorf as America's unofficial diplomatic headquarters had ended. Then, in 2017, the Waldorf Astoria closed entirely for what was described as a comprehensive renovation. The plan is ambitious: convert much of the building into luxury condominium residences while preserving a smaller, ultra-high-end hotel on the lower floors. After closing in 2017 for conversion to branded residences plus a smaller hotel, the property's residences are being marketed, with the hotel component still pending completion. The condominiums are being marketed to ultra-wealthy buyers, with prices reaching into the tens of millions of dollars. But the legend of Track 61 remains untouched, preserved, if only as a ghost. The old platform still exists, sealed behind locked gates deep beneath the hotel. It sits in the darkness, largely unchanged since its heyday. Every once in a while, railway staff or preservationists are allowed brief access to see it, and they describe it as frozen in time. The platform is narrow, just wide enough for the old elevator doors and the track itself. The walls are industrial brick and concrete, stained with decades of soot and grime. The air is thick with dust and the faint smell of oil and electricity. The elevator mechanism is still there, though it groans and creaks when tested. The electrical systems still function, though they haven't been used in earnest for decades. The walls still hum faintly with the sound of passing trains on the active tracks nearby. It's a secret museum with no visitors, a time capsule of presidential mystery and New York ingenuity. Some preservationists have advocated for opening Track 61 to the public. They argue that it's a significant piece of American history, one that deserves to be seen, studied, and remembered. They point to other cities that have successfully turned abandoned infrastructure into tourist attractions: the Paris catacombs, London's abandoned tube stations, underground bunkers across Europe. Others believe it should remain sealed, that its power comes from its secrecy, that making it public would diminish the very thing that makes it fascinating, that some mysteries are better left mysterious. There's also the practical reality. Track 61 sits in an active railway yard. Metro North trains still use the tracks around it. Opening it to public tours would create significant safety and security challenges. For now, the debate continues, and Track 61 waits in the dark. Occasionally, if you're on the right Metro North train leaving Grand Central, heading toward Westchester or Connecticut, you might catch a glimpse of it through the window. Just for a second. A narrow platform, a set of doors, a shadow in the tunnel wall. And then it's gone, just like the presidents who once used it. Why does this story still fascinate us? Maybe because it's more than just an architectural curiosity. It's a reflection of something deeply human, the lengths we go to protect image, dignity, and control. Roosevelt could have faced the crowds openly. He could have let people see the truth of his condition. But he understood that in his time the image of a strong, standing president mattered more than the complicated reality of the man himself. And so he built tunnels, both literal and metaphorical. He created illusions. He descended beneath the city to rise above it. Track 61 isn't just a tunnel. It's a monument to that illusion, the intersection between vulnerability and power, between truth and necessity, between who we are and who we must appear to be. It's a reminder that history isn't always what we see on the surface, that the stories we're told about leaders, about power, about strength, are often carefully constructed performances, and that sometimes the most interesting part of the story is what's been hidden underneath. Roosevelt used Track 61 because he felt he had to, because the America of his time wouldn't fully accept a president who couldn't walk, because vulnerability was seen as weakness, because the image of presidential strength mattered more than the messy reality of human limitation. But in doing so, he created something that outlasted him, a secret platform beneath the city, a hidden passageway that connected the world of politics to the world of infrastructure, a physical manifestation of the invisible barriers between public and private, between strength and struggle, between the person and the persona. The memorial to Franklin Roosevelt in Washington, D.C. famously includes a statue of him in a wheelchair, but it wasn't part of the original design. It was added in 2001 after years of advocacy by disability rights activists, who used the slogan, "Don't hide FDR's source of strength." President Bill Clinton, dedicating that statue, said, "By showing President Roosevelt as he was, we show the world that we have faith that in America you are measured for what you are and what you have achieved, not for what you have lost." It's a beautiful sentiment, but it's also complicated by the fact that Roosevelt himself would likely not have wanted to be depicted that way, not because he was ashamed, but because he believed the performance of strength was essential to his ability to lead in his particular historical moment. We all have our Track 61s, the parts of ourselves we keep buried, the vulnerabilities we lock behind steel doors, the truths we descend beneath the surface to avoid revealing. And maybe that's okay. Maybe we all need a little invisibility sometimes. Maybe privacy isn't the same as dishonesty. Maybe there's a difference between deception and discretion. But the beauty of Track 61, the reason it endures as a story, is that eventually the truth came out, the locked doors were opened, the lights were turned on, and the secret was revealed. Not to diminish Roosevelt's legacy, but to enrich it, to remind us that even the most powerful among us are human, that strength doesn't mean the absence of struggle, that greatness can coexist with vulnerability, that leadership doesn't require perfection. In 2013, Track 61 turned 100 years old, the same age as Grand Central Terminal itself. The platform has outlived Roosevelt, outlived the era of great railway travel, outlived the Waldorf's golden age as America's hotel, but it hasn't outlived our fascination with it, because Track 61 represents something timeless, the gap between what we show the world and what we hide from it. The infrastructure, both physical and emotional, that we build to manage that gap. It's a reminder that every city has layers, that beneath the surfaces we see, there are always deeper stories, hidden tracks, secret elevators, passageways that lead to places we're not supposed to know about, and that sometimes, if we're lucky, those secrets emerge into the light, not to scandalize or diminish, but to illuminate, to show us that history is richer and stranger than we imagined, that power is more complicated than we thought, that even presidents need hiding places. Track 61 is still there beneath the Waldorf, beneath Park Avenue, beneath the thundering streets of Midtown Manhattan, waiting in the darkness, holding its secrets, a monument to mystery in a city that never stops revealing itself. So next time you're in New York, standing in the Waldorf's glittering lobby or hurrying through Grand Central's vast main concourse, pause for a second. Look down. Beneath those marble floors, beneath the rush and the noise and the endless motion of the city, history is still waiting. Silent, dark, and just a few feet below your shoes. A forgotten track, a secret elevator, and the faint echo of a train that once carried a president through the shadows of the city that never sleeps.